Welcome back everybody, my name is Nick930 and this is my hardware review for Sony's latest retro console, the PlayStation Classic. The PlayStation Classic is a micro-scale version of the original PlayStation with 20 pre-installed games and 2 included controllers. The system costs $100 US and is available to purchase now, but the real question here is whether this emulator machine is worth picking up. So first, let's talk about the hardware. The PlayStation Classic is about 5.5 inches wide and designed to look exactly like the original PSX from the mid-90s. The power button is used to turn the system on and off, while the reset button allows users to quit the game they're playing and return to the main menu of the system. Because the center disc input is only decorative, the open button is mostly for show. However, certain games that require multiple discs will require you to press the open button to simulate the disc swapping required in those classic titles. The system itself uses a MediaTek board with a 1.5 GHz quad-core CPU and a PowerVR GE8300 GPU, with 1 GB of 1800 MHz RAM and 16 GB of storage. The games on board take up almost exactly 16 GB, so you can forget about trying to add more games to the system's onboard storage. The onboard specs are more than enough to handle this old software, so really, performance just boils down to the quality of the emulation itself. The controllers seem to match the originals almost exactly, although instead of the original connectors, they connect via USB, and unfortunately, the cable length is far too short for practical use, so some USB extensions should be considered. The Classic's boot up is a bit different than you might remember, with a modified Sony Computer Entertainment logo and then a transition directly into the game list screen. The games are displayed in a linear list with all titles visible in a round array, but there doesn't seem a way to sort the games like on the NES or SNES Classics. You also can't change display settings like those other devices. It's a shame there's no option to customize the display sizes like the PS Vita allows in its emulation mode, or add in simulated scan lines for a more authentic experience. But thankfully, each game uses the internal memory to save data, and can also save a single save point when you reset the system, allowing you to resume from exactly where you left off, rather than needing to find a way to save in-game. Other than that, there's not really much else to the system. There's no online support, so no potential for software updates, and there's no trophy support or anything like that. The system really is just an emulator with a bunch of classic PlayStation games installed on a tiny drive. Now, let's talk about the games. The selection of games for the PlayStation Classic is admittedly lackluster, but honestly, I'm not surprised in the slightest. While Nintendo still has exclusive ownership of basically all the fan-favorite franchises on their classic retro consoles, Sony's PlayStation 1 is loaded with games that are no longer owned by Sony Computer Entertainment. There's also a good number of titles like Medieval and Resident Evil 2 that are currently being remade for modern platforms, so it's understandable that the publishers involved in those projects don't want to try and compete with themselves. And then other titles like the popular Tony Hawk's Pro Skater series would never find their way onto a system like this, due to the massive licensing hurdles Sony would have to go through because of the game's soundtrack and Tony Hawk himself, who's no longer in a contract with Activision. So what we're stuck with are a handful of good games like Tekken 3, Metal Gear Solid, and Twisted Metal, but then there's odd choices like Cool Borders 2, the original Grand Theft Auto, and Rainbow Six. On top of that, many of the games that are included like Tekken 3 are the PAL versions, resulting in some lower performance and latency issues when compared to the NTSC titles. Now, for those of you that don't know, PAL was a video format typically used overseas where 25 frames were transmitted a second with 625 scan lines. The NTSC format, however, was the standard in the West and produced 30 frames per second at a reduced 525 scan lines per second. With these older games, every frame counts, especially for the more difficult platforming summits in Rayman or fighting controls in games like Tekken. So it's surprising that Sony decided to go with the PAL versions instead. However, you can plug in some supported USB keyboards into the controller ports and access a developer menu, allowing you to switch the region to the NTSC option if you'd like, but I personally don't have a supported keyboard to test this out myself. So by itself, the PlayStation Classic may not seem like much. It's really just an emulator stuffed into a tiny retro box with some short cords and a few games you may or may not remember. The price is technically fair, considering the collective price of all 20 games here is roughly $106 according to the PlayStation Store, and the components themselves seem to be a decent build quality. But this is assuming you're interested in all 20 titles. The value of this device really comes down to how many of the included games you're actually interested in playing again. Obviously, the more tech-savvy community members have already begun to break down this device and add in all the games we wish could have been legitimately included, but that's generally not for everyone, and you can skip a lot of the frustration of trying to get emulations to function properly by just purchasing the digital versions of these same games through the PlayStation Store and playing them on compatible Sony products. It's a shame Sony couldn't find a way to pull this product off properly. Having a device come stock with all the classics we've come to associate with the original PlayStation would have been a great follow-up to the success Nintendo saw with their own emulation products. But Sony's loose grip on their older properties and the multitude of licensing issues that arose with the advancements of gaming in the 3D era make that more of a pipe dream. And we may have reached the limit in terms of officially licensed emulation products, at least for now. But what do you guys think? Do you guys like the PlayStation Classic? If not, which games do you think should have been included in order to justify the price? Let me know in the comments section, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos like this posted every week.